you've come quite a way since the beginning of this course. Before we proceed further, let's assess your progress this far. First, you learned to think more analytically about music, from the smallest elements all the way to larger structural concerns. And you did this largely without depending on reading a single written note, but instead memorizing and organizing the music in your head. Then you learned to apply some of those principles to the simpler task of listening to another work of music as you read a score. Removing the task of supplying your own internal soundtrack made it possible to really dig into the details. Then we tested your external ear vigorously with both sight singing and dictation, flexing and building up those musical muscles. This all means that you're ready to come around full circle back to mental memorization, stacking on top of that the more firmly applied analytical frame of mind, along to an energized, more aware ear. Over the next 2 lessons, we'll see every bit of training put to work. You're now going to score read the Beethoven Piano Sonata movement that you memorized 3 units ago, supplying your memorized audio as the soundtrack and guide. And this unit need not be long and laborious either. We'll fill in the missing points of overall architecture in the next lesson, after studying techniques of active score reading in this lesson. Then we can go quickly forwards into the internal ear training coming up in Unit 5, after which full audiation awaits you in Unit 6. But first, let's test your memory while applying your dictation skills. Print up a sheet of plain staff paper from the course resources. Prep that page with a grand staff, adding an E minor key signature of 1 sharp and a time signature of 3/4. Now see if you can write out the first 8 bars directly from memory. It's fine to use a piano as your guide, but the more you can avoid that, the more the effort will develop your ear. Don't worry about leaving things out, or using a rough approximation of certain details like multiple voices or rhythmic values. Just write out the melody as best you remember it from the first dotted quarter note on E, then add the other elements below it. Go ahead and pause the screen now and give that a try, with a time limit of 20 minutes. A typical result might show something like this. Pretty much all the melody correct, some of the bass, and around half realized on the harmony. If so, then that's fine for a first try in memorizing by ear, as opposed to memorizing by playing. But you should really try to develop your comprehension of the musical details you hear to a fine point. Not just their basic form and melody, but the motion of the bass line, the character of the accompaniment style, and the function and identity of each harmonic change. Here's the piano score of the first part for you to look at, finally, after all that memorization. Compare your dictation results to that, and file away any blank spots for further development, not of the mistakes themselves, but of the kind of error, whether recognizing harmony or hearing the bass line or whatever. But if you really memorized all or most of the music, you're now in an enviable position. You know, in advance, the meaning that Beethoven was trying to convey by notating what you see on the page in front of you now. When you have the music inside your head completely, the score just becomes a list of instructions to the performer. That means that we as score readers have a number of options that make scores like these much more usable and navigable documents. The first and most basic option is just score reading as you play back your internal memory of the piece. As I mentioned a minute ago, the more complete your memory of the details, the richer and more comprehensive experience this can be. And it's not just the note and the functions, but the dynamics, the nuances, and the fluctuations of tempo that a piece might require to really sound masterful. You'll find that those are things you can add yourself, drawing out your internal memory of a piece to have more rubato or a stricter interpretation, to be lush with pedal or clean and dry, to be generously expressive or more economical. Such elements are, in fact, unavoidable, and you may have developed your own individual interpretation already without realizing it. Go ahead and read the first 8 bars along to your internal memory, but add some exaggerated dynamics just to test this ability. Let's put some hairpins on either side of the sforzando in the 3rd bar, and another pair in the 5th and 6th bars. Run through that now, and let your mental impression really lean into those nuances. Did it sound like this? Don't be afraid to play around with such variables, both for fun and as a way of establishing more control over your internalized memory. It should be mutable, and not a fixed, rigid recording. Another option is speed reading, which you may have already heard in a rehearsal when a director or conductor lightly sings along with a passage in a score at a very fast tempo, reminding themselves of a point of phrasing, or trying to recall a place that needed work. That's also a skill you probably now possess. Back to the top, and score read those first 8 bars again, this time playing them molto vivace, almost as if every pair of 3/4 bars was a fast 6/8. About like this. Now you play and read all 8 bars that fast. I played it back in my head to score just now, and it sounded a bit like this. But I didn't even need to play it back. I just looked at it and I got what it meant. That's like an extreme acceleration of mental hearing, where you don't even need to hear it. It's more as if you just understood it intrinsically, the same way speed reading is taught by comprehending sections of sentences, rather than reading methodically word by word. The musical memorization unit taught you to memorize section by section. Now here's a third option for navigation. You can look at any part of the score, recognize it, and play it back in your head. You don't need to start at the beginning and run through every bar. Even if you didn't quite remember all the structural guideposts represented by each phrase, you could just use your recently honed sight-singing abilities on bar 17, for instance. Mi, re, mi, so. Remember the section that started with that motive, and take it from there. Try that now, starting right on bar 17 and reading through to bar 24. Now jump to the coda and do the same thing. I'm not even going to mark it for you or tell you the bar number, just find it, read it, and play it in your head. With your trained memory, you no longer need all those charts and diagrams that I provided in Unit 1. You can tell what's going on immediately by the layout of the notes, how the subject introduces itself over the first 16 bars, how it recapitulates from bar 33, how that recap leads to the coda using recognizable motives, and how in between the subject and the recap there's a development. That's the fourth option, reading by structural components and sections. With that kind of organization in mind, the score is telling you far more clearly than any bar number or rehearsal figure what's happening in which part of the music. And that leads to one last form of navigation, thinking of the entirety of the music as one thing, both orally and visually. It's like looking at the whole map and seeing that the area has one general shape, structure, and architecture. You can zoom in closer to see how that divides into sections of music, like municipalities on a highway, then into different phrases like city streets, and then the building blocks of motives like city blocks, and the individual notes like houses. Then you can zoom out again and see the whole picture at once. This may seem a little fanciful at first, but in fact I often just look at a page of score and absorb far more than I can put into words in a couple of minutes. Sometimes a page can just look wrong to me, or very, very right. Then I have to break that down in a lecture such as those that I offer on the Orchestration Online channel. An orchestrated page might take hours of explanation, both the basics and the finer points. So let's finish this lesson by exploring all of those steps. The following 4 screens contain the full score of Beethoven's Ninth Piano Sonata, Movement 2, while your inner ear contains the entire audio impression. The first thing to do is to read through the entire piece with repeats as you mentally supply the music. Pause each screen from the start of the green light, as I've arranged them into only a few seconds apart on this video. After that, I'll provide a list of bars to speed read, or to drop in on randomly to read and internally hear. I'll also supply a sequence of sections for you to identify by sight. Then in the next video lesson, we'll look at everything about this piece we haven't discussed yet, and how that completes our understanding.